Stand by for the latest information from the Texas Capitol and the historic impeachment trial of Attorney General Ken Paxton.
The top law enforcement officer in the state of Texas impeached.
Republicans and Democrats in the Texas House of Representatives overwhelmingly adopting 20 articles for misconduct.
It's 10 times worse than it's been voted.
Ken Paxton maintaining his innocence, calling it all politics.
And they are showcasing their absolute contempt for the electoral process.
Now all eyes are on the Texas Senate for the first impeachment trial of a Texas Attorney General.
Everyone will do their job to the utmost in fairness.
KVUE special coverage of the impeachment trial of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton starts now. Well, we thank you for joining us for this special coverage of the impeachment trial. I'm Ashley Goudeau.
And I'm Tony Plohetski, and we are continuing to monitor the situation at the Texas Capitol in downtown Austin, where, Ashley, at this hour, it is my understanding that those 30 senators have gathered in the Betty King room. That is where the deliberations are occurring at this time. Senators have been instructed or agreed among themselves. No one is to have his or her cell phone out during this matter, and these are truly designed to be, at least for now, private deliberations among the state senators with no one disclosing what is happening inside that room.
The Betty King room, for those of you who may not know, is a room in the back. It's behind the Senate chamber, and so it is sometimes used for committee hearings, and so sometimes the public is permitted to access it, but it's not a room that is easily accessible to the public. They are, again, in a room behind the chamber. As we are entering hour 4 now, Tony, of these jury deliberations, and let's talk about what it would take here. There are 19 Republicans and 12 Democrats in the Senate. 21 votes are what is needed in order for conviction in this trial. So if all 12 of the Democrats were to vote to convict, it would take 9 Republicans to join them in order to convict Ken Paxton and remove him from office.
And under the Texas Constitution and rules adopted by the Senate, State Senator Angela Paxton, that is Ken Paxton's wife, is required to attend the trial. She was there every day. However, she cannot vote and she cannot be in that room while senators are deliberating as they are doing at this hour. However, her presence will count toward the total number of votes needed to convict, which some people see as, Ashley, a vote to acquit. Yeah, and so she has been, that was video that you saw of her. And let's talk a little bit, Tony, about her demeanor throughout this trial. I think we have seen her very composed, stone-faced, straight-faced throughout this, but also moments, pretty jovial. She would walk out and blow kisses to the crowd, wave to the crowd. She did have a serious look on her face as they were going through the articles during closing arguments this morning. It was clear she was going through those articles line by line, article by article. Actually, also important to note that as senators are presumably doing that behind closed doors this afternoon, those articles, many of them, or in fact most of them, have multiple components to them, multiple prongs, if you will, that in order to convict, senators must agree that those prongs and those criteria are met. And not only that they are met, but that they are, the offense is so egregious and the behavior is so egregious that it warrants removing Paxton from office, along with that thought of that they have to meet all the prongs. I want to talk about, because we were talking about Senator Paxton's presence, let's talk about Ken Paxton's presence throughout all of this. We finally saw him return to the Senate chamber today. We did, although it is very noteworthy and has been a source of much discussion throughout this 10-day trial. Ken Paxton was present on the opening day of the trial. He sat with his attorney, Tony Buzbee, his lead attorney, while Buzbee entered his not guilty plea. After that, Ken Paxton himself was nowhere to be found during this impeachment process, during this impeachment trial. However, Ashley, we know that he was in the Capitol on the Senate floor this morning for those very impassioned closing arguments.
Those closing arguments, as senators are deliberating on 16 of the 20 articles of impeachment against Paxton. And we know that those charges in those articles range from misuse of office all the way to conspiracy and attempted conspiracy, Tony. But there are 4 articles that the senators are not considering today.
And those have to do with state security fraud charges that were brought against Ken Paxton 8 years ago, back in 2015. Those charges are still pending, although as we have been reporting throughout this entire proceeding, there is new information that those charges may in fact be moving forward. They are to be heard after much fight over what the venue would be for those charges. They are assigned to a judge in Harris County, that's Houston. There was a court hearing about a month ago in which the judge expressed a strong desire for those charges to move forward. There has been discussion about how this impeachment process, should Ken Paxton be convicted in this impeachment process, Ashley, how that might play into what could happen with those state security fraud charges. His attorney suggesting that if Ken Paxton were booted from office, that he may have a willingness to enter into a discussion concerning the outcome, the disposition of those charges.
And so when we think about the other 16 charges that are set aside, most of them directly state things, they directly allege Ken Paxton of acts. But then you have the final 4, Articles 16 through 20, which are sort of catch-all. That's how we've been referring to them, articles, because they basically allege things like unfitness for office, they deal with public trust, they deal with him overall in his performance, and that if the senators believe the actions in any of the previous articles are to be true, then he could be convicted on one of those. And in fact, during the closing statements today, we heard State Representative Andrew Murr, who is the chair of the House Board of Managers, speak directly to Articles 16 through 20. Let's listen to that now.
These articles ask the Senate to do exactly what Mr. Paxton's counsel is begging you not to do, to look at the entirety of Mr. Paxton's conduct. And when the Senate does so, there is no reasonable doubt that Mr. Paxton committed the acts set forth in these articles, and that these acts were an abuse of office and a breach of public trust.
So really, again, speaking to directly about what Articles 16 through 20 are and certainly what they allege, Tony.
And one of the allegations, one of the underpinning allegations to all of this, Ashley, is that Ken Paxton transformed the Attorney General's office, the state agency that you and I and all of us as taxpayers pay for, into what they called a private law firm that was acting on behalf of Nate Paul, an Austin investor who was under investigation at the time by the FBI in a case that subsequently did result in charges against him. Also, during his closing statement today, State Representative Murr spoke to those allegations involving Ken Paxton.
The office of the Attorney General of the state of Texas is Mr. Paxton's law firm, and he is the firm's only client. He directs it to serve himself, not the people of Texas. If you vote to condone that, then high office will simply be the most profitable choice for any self-serving crook, and it won't even have to be hidden.
Let's take a step back now and talk about how we got here and how we got to those statements, such bold statements by Representative Murr in terms of how the whistleblowers described, and the words they used were how Paxton turned the keys of the office over to Nate Paul to help him with this investigation. Nate Paul, an Austin real estate investor who had a search warrant executed on his properties by federal agents as well as members of DPS state troopers, were helping to execute this article. And Tony, he alleges that they went into the properties searching for guns and drugs. And after about 2 hours of searching, after not finding that, they changed the warrant, the search warrant, sort of on the spot. And he also built this conspiracy of who all that would take to do that.
Right. He contends that on the spot, they transformed their investigation into a white-collar crime, a financial crimes investigation. By the way, though it is white-collar crime and allegations of fraud that led to Nate Paul's indictment on federal charges earlier this year. But Nate Paul came to believe that he was the target of a conspiracy by the FBI and others in law enforcement, a magistrate judge, officials from the district clerk's office, to act against him. And so we saw, Ashley, in closing statements today, Tony Buzbee, lead counsel for Ken Paxton, speaking to that.
Right. He talked about the fact that though Nate Paul believed, this conspiracy, and certainly the whistleblowers said that he then, Paxton, went from hiring a special prosecutor, directing, his law enforcement team to investigate these claims. They're looking at metadata on the search warrants. That it got to the point where a special prosecutor who had been hired by Paxton went out and started serving grand jury subpoenas, and that 30 of those subpoenas were served. And that's when that was really, I think, the turning point for the whistleblowers, Tony, where they said we had to step in. And
well, we know the week that they went to the FBI,
right.
that was the week. That was the turning point.
And despite all of that, we have heard Tony Buzbee and the defense team say there is no evidence in this case, that there's no actual hard proof evidence that anything has happened. And so with that, he invoked a message to the senators telling them that they needed to take courage when it came to their deliberations and acquit Ken Paxton. We want to play that sound for you now.
All of this foolishness that they've accused this man of is false. But the only question I have in my mind is whether there is courage in this room, to vote the way the evidence requires. I think there is. I hope there is. I pray there is. I'm asking you to agree with the 4.2 million Texans who put this man in office as Attorney General to put this man back to work and vote not guilty.
Let's talk about that. Put this man back to work when he was impeached, as is required by the Texas Constitution. When the House voted overwhelmingly, we might add 121 to 23, to convict Ken Paxton, he was automatically suspended from office.
That's correct. And we have been looking to the future about what happens as a result of this vote. Should Ken Paxton be acquitted on all 16 of those articles, he could return to work immediately as if he never left, although, as Ashley mentioned, he was gone since May 27th was the date of his suspension. If he were to be convicted, and keep in mind, if he is convicted on a single article, it is game over for Ken Paxton.
Automatically removed from office. That is per the Texas Constitution. And once that happens, if that happens, the Senate then takes another vote. Each side gets 15 minutes to argue about disqualification. And this is whether or not Ken Paxton should be disqualified from ever holding office in the state of Texas again.
And so as we look to the late afternoon and evening this evening, we just want to let you know that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, announced earlier today that the Senate, he has requested that they deliberate until at least 8 p.m. tonight, although he did say they could go longer if they so desire. And then if they cannot reach any sort of verdict, return to the Capitol, to the Senate chamber, or to the Betty King room, I should say, at 9 a.m. tomorrow to continue those deliberations.
Right, and they would then continue deliberating tomorrow if need be from 9 to 8. If it goes into Sunday, they would return at 12 p.m. And the Lieutenant Governor did not give them a hard cutoff for Sunday night. He said, you late into the night, and at that point, if there's still no decision, they could be sequestered in the Capitol, meaning they would have to sleep in their offices and would not be allowed to leave until they make a decision.
And in the meantime, he has admonished them to not have any sort of public dialogue or private dialogue other than among themselves during this process, to not read any sort of news accounts. And so we saw that admonishment similar to, frankly, what jurors in a criminal trial are told.
And so it certainly will be interesting to see just how long. I mean, I think there were some people who walked into this with assumptions and did not think that they would be deliberating for a long time. Where now, like I said, they got this case handed to them a little bit before noon. And so here we are, 4 hours in.
Yeah. So we're going to continue to monitor the activity at the Capitol, of course, very closely, and we'll certainly keep you posted.
Absolutely. We'll see you right back here on KVUE for the news at 5 and 6, and with updates throughout the night on what's happening as the jury continues to deliberate. We thank you for joining us.